They ask you about Quran. They ask you religious questions, basically. If you can't answer those, doesn't matter what kind of expert you are, doesn't matter how professional you are, my friend, rejected. You can't get that job. In here, I don't really feel safe. I can't do any political activities here. I'm afraid of those. If someone on the street with a car hits you and escape, remember why. If someone stabs you on the street for no reason and escape, remember why. Basically, I'm an Iranian refugee. I escaped to Turkey in January 2014, and actually I'm not a refugee yet after almost 7 years. I'm just an asylum seeker because they keep rejecting us. The immigration office here rejects us through superficial interviews. The interviews are not so professional, and that's how I got rejected, and I'm not still a refugee, recognized as a refugee.
So why did you escape from Iran?
Well, I was a political activist. There was this election in 2009 in Iran, presidential election, which went wrong. People believed that it was rigged, there was cheatings, and people went to the streets, there were riots, and the Revolutionary Guard killed, arrested, etc. So many people. We were shooting back then. We were taking videos, basically. A while after that, like a couple of years after that, all together we got together to form and edit a documentary after those videos. Back then, we didn't dare use them. We were afraid. But a while after that, we wanted to tell the world what was going on. And it was when we got arrested, tortured, etc. Fortunately, before that, I had the tapes burnt and lost, so they didn't have any evidence. That's how they released me. Like a year after that or something, again, because of a trip that I had to Turkey to visit my brother, again I got arrested, and some interrogation. Why did you go to Turkey? Why? Who are you connected to? Or who are you giving information to? Or what are you doing, basically? Which of course I denied everything. It was just one day interrogation. A while after that, somehow, through some other friends, they could actually access my videos, the tapes, some of them, because some of them survived that burning part. They remained in the cameras. And I had to escape. I lived on the street literally for 5 days. Just in Tehran, just escaping from the intelligence agents, Revolutionary Guard agents, etc.
And how did you come to Turkey?
Well, I took the train along with my wife. It was a train from Tehran to Ankara, and on the way it had a stop in Kayseri. And actually we got a whole cabin. We bought 4 tickets. My wife did. I was living on the street actually. She arranged everything. I was planning to cross the border illegally, but my wife didn't allow it. It was such a big risk. The risk was higher than coming by train, because the borders of the train wasn't so strict. There wasn't so many agents there, so many controls. So that's why we decided to do this in a rush, in 5 days, in less than a week.
How many times were you arrested in Iran?
Twice.
Twice? And what did they do to you?
Well, first time it was longer. It was like 7, 8, 10 days, something like this. Mainly interrogations, verbal abuse, verbal torture, and physical torture, of course.
What kind of physical torture?
like slapping in the face, or he actually burned my arm with cigarette. You can still see the scar. Saying that I want to do something that for the rest of your life, whoever who looks at your arm thinks that you're a heroin addict, because they do these things. But anyway, they couldn't find anything, so I was released. Second time, it was just one day interrogation. There it was just verbal torture. Upon release, they said that if someone on the street with a car hits you and escape, remember why. If someone stabs you on the street for no reason and escape, remember why. Basically, they meant don't do anything, no activities. What are you doing? They literally asked me, why did you come back when I came to Turkey? Why did you come back? To visit my brother? Why did you come back? It's my home, it's my country. Why did you come back? They implied that you should either go or the rest of your life would be like this. You know what I mean? That kind of threatening. They told me if you get arrested for any reasons, like a fight on the street or an accident or anything, your political profile will automatically open again, which is no connection, right? But they would do that. They said that they would do that.
And when you first came to Turkey, you were living with your brother, right?
For a while, yes, until he left. He got resettled in Canada.
How long your brother stayed in Turkey?
Less than 3 years.
And how did your brother move to Canada? Would you like to tell us?
Well, it was a standard procedure. An asylum seeker used to apply to UNHCR, and they would give them some interview time, and they would interview them, evaluate their case, their claim. If approved, after a while, they would resettle them in another country, all by themselves. Even no passport is required, because a refugee usually doesn't have a passport. They would provide travel documents. That's the standard procedure that used to be. Today it's different.
And when you first came to Turkey, you also applied to UNHCR?
That's right.
And then what happened?
Well, they interviewed us. Back then, apparently, political activists weren't so popular among interviewers of UNHCR. They rejected us. But appealing to those rejections was much more reliable, because they would give you another interview with another expert. Today it's different. We appealed, but before my appeal letter was even opened, UNHCR gave up. Like, they said, no, we're not doing it anymore.
In 2018, right?
I think it was sometime around 2018. It's not closed, shut down completely. They just don't register, they don't interview. They might take care of your country part. Why do I say might? Because countries are not actually getting refugees. So many different reasons. Corona situation.
And then Kayseri Migration Office began to interview you.
Yes, they got in charge and they started interviewing people. And unfortunately in here, 99, maybe 0.9% of the cases are rejected.
Why?
Well, I don't know exactly why. I would love to know why. I would love to ask someone why. Because at least my interview wasn't a professional interview. It was so superficial. They didn't ask about main parts. For example, they didn't ask about my political thoughts. What kind of a person are you? What kind of a system is your favorite? Is it democracy, secular democracy? What do you like? What are you after? To find out whether or not I'm telling the truth, at least. They didn't ask me anything. They just asked what happened in Iran, and then later on, nothing about what happened here. I've had some activities here too, but they didn't really care. You know,
How many times they interviewed you? How many times Kayseri Migration Office interviewed you?
well, since they got in charge, only once.
Only once. When did it happen?
It happened this, I think, June 2020, a couple of months ago. And
Now do you know they reject almost all of the applications?
because we have friends,
You have friends.
yeah, there, you know, there is only one person I know who is approved, and we actually tend to say that it's one, not 1 in 100, but 1 in 1,000. It's like a miracle. When I came here back in 2014, things were different. UNHCR was in charge. You would go to the office in Ankara, you would apply, then they would give you a date for main interview, and then you would wait in the city they actually introduced. Like, they would give you a couple of choices, small cities of course, and you would wait until your main interview. They would interview you, professionals of UNHCR usually. They would evaluate your case. If approved, after another process, they would resettle you in another country, third country. This changed.
That's the way your brother moved to Canada, right?
So many others, my brother for example. This changed, and I don't know why, no one knows why, UNHCR gave up. The difference between when UNHCR was in charge and when now that immigration office is in charge mainly is that the interviewers back then in UNHCR, they were experts, they were professionals, they knew what they were doing. At least here, the one who interviewed me wasn't a professional, wasn't an expert. She didn't know the meaning of so many words.
Such as?
For example, I said in Persian, I said I'm a movie editor. The translator also didn't know. I explained it to the translator, and then the translator explained it to her. She didn't know what movie editor is, what movie editing was. Or I showed a copy of Amazon.com, the book that I translated. She didn't even know what Amazon.com is. Or maybe she pretended, I don't know really. It's called immigration office. No one speaks English. No, not one person. Well, there are people who speak Persian, there are people who speak Arabic, of course. There are people who speak, languages of those, mainly Persian and Arabic. But no one speaks English. This is called immigration office, isn't it? Am I wrong? They don't have a person. I wish my interview was in English, so I wouldn't have to explain to the translator, and the translator explain it to someone else, and they type something else. It takes, the words could change. You understand me now. You know what I'm talking about now. But the things that happened to me really should be mentioned from my mouth, not a translator. So why don't you have a person who speaks English? It's our destiny, it's our fate, it's our future. Like, my life direction can change by someone's decision. That decision shouldn't be personal, shouldn't be made personal.
When will the outcome of your application will be revealed?
No one knows.
No one.
Yeah.
Do you have a guess?
Well, usually, at least that's what they told me, within 1 or 2 months, but now it's been 3 months, I think.
Most probably it's going to be rejected.
Most probably. At least that's what the experience says.
So you are not allowed to leave Kayseri and move to another city of the world?
Not without a permit. We have to get a permit from immigration office.
What's the condition of this permit?
Well, you need to have some good reason. Like, for example, back then it was easier. Your reason could be like, I need a trip, I need to travel. They would give you. But nowadays it's harder. Right now that I'm waiting for the result of my appeal, I can't get it. Because my ID card doesn't have any address in it. and they changed it actually. You have to go to that website, Devlet, and you have to get it there. Without a proper ID number, you can't have an account in there. So right now it's impossible.
So Turkish officials reject your application, and they also want you to leave the country if your appeal is rejected.
If they appeal and appeal and appeal, which people can do with lots of money, if all of them are rejected, they just say leave the country. How? They don't care. They just ask you to leave. They give you like, I don't know, 10 days, 15 days. You have 15 days to leave the country.
Wherever you go.
Wherever you go. Doesn't matter where you go.
Have you ever been threatened while you are living in Kayseri?
Indirectly.
In Kayseri?
In Kayseri, but indirectly.
Indirectly, how?
Which means, there is a friend of mine here. We worked together for a while. We made music, like with political content, or let's say some sort of protesting content. This friend of mine told me that there was a case in Iran, like called Turkey, in intelligence office, because of some relatives, friends, I don't know. His name was there with another person. Who could be that other person? He only worked with me. You know what I mean? That's why I'm indirectly. I am so cautious about making friends, making Iranian friends.
Because you're afraid that they might be an Iranian agents or intelligence agents?
Yes, that's the case. There are a couple of different categories of Iranian refugees. One category is political, having a different political thoughts, like myself, or being a political activist, for which your life is in danger, of course. You're in danger of prosecution, you're in danger of execution even, or incarceration. The other category is LGBT people, LGBTQ+, etc. Homosexuality is not allowed in Iran, and actually, in some cases, the punishment is death. So they have to either hide or escape, leave the country. Another category is social category. For example, you have some social problems. For example, you may have heard that this person has a daughter and forces the daughter to marry this guy because he owes him, etc. These kind of stories. If that girl escapes, that case could be a social case. That story could be a social story. So many different types. This is just an example. The other one is religion or religious cases. For example, Christian converts, basically converting to another religion from Islam is not allowed. It's a sin, also it's a crime. So Christian converts need to either hide or escape. There is another category which is also religious. There is a religion in Iran called Baha'i people. Their prophet's name is Baha'u'ddin, and he is buried in Israel.
In Israel?
Israel. Maybe that's one reason, but basically government, the state, and some fanatic people, they don't like them. They're not really liked. They attack them. They're the most oppressed people in Iran. Their case is so obvious that back then when UNHCR was in charge, they would come here. If they wanted to go to the US, they wouldn't be even interviewed. They would directly go to country section of the process. Immigration office today rejects all of them, even Baha'i people. If you're gay, you can't be alive. You're not allowed to be alive in the Islamic regime of Iran. Immigration office here rejects all of them, all of us. drinks, drink shops, bars, discos, dancing. Singing for women is illegal. There are so many things that are illegal, and it's, you know, weird. You know, the thing is, let me just summarize it in this way. The regime is Islamic. Whatever haram in Islam is illegal in Iran. Whatever you can think of, like dancing. You know what I mean? Basic human rights, basic freedom. That's the one. Number two is economy. What the Islamic regime has done to people's economy in the past few decades, war hasn't. People are not able to buy water, mineral water, or anything, bottled water. It's so expensive. Like renting a house is at least the minimum wage of a worker. How can a worker rent a house? Why don't you fix it? They can't fix it. Most people there are thinking about immigration anyhow. Mostly those who can do it. But those who can't, just think about it. By can, I mean money, you know, it takes lots of money.
And another thing which is disturbing for you in Iran was the censorship.
Yes.
Could you provide some examples to us about how huge the censorship in Iran is?
Well, there are two types of censorship, first of all. One type is about whatever which is produced inside the country. The other one is about whatever that is imported, like foreign movies and TV shows. About domestic productions, it's so weird. You write something, for example, a screenplay, you have to hand it over, they read it, non-expert people, of course, like some officials who work at cultural centers, etc. They're basically mullahs. They read your artistic word and they say, not this, not this, not that. If you are really willing to make, for example, that movie, you have to tweak them, you have to change them, you have to remove or censor, self-censor them. Then again they read, they say, okay, here's production permit. I don't think you guys have such thing here, production permit. This is something I think that only exists in Iran. Here's your production permit. Then you produce your work, you make your movie basically. They watch your movie again. Not this part, not this part, not that part. Any political, any sexual content, or bisexual, I mean even a simple kiss. Any man and woman touching, you know, they should be married, etc. They have to be changed in order to be screened. That's about domestic. Foreign products, they get widely censored before screening or before being shown on TV. For example, years back I watched this movie. It's a funny story. The name was Groundhog Day. You may have seen it. It's about a person who gets stuck in a day. The day gets repeated in a cold city. That's what I got from the movie. Years later, I don't know what happened when I was here. I was like, let's watch this movie. It was such a nice movie. When I get to know the actor, Bill Murray, I got interested. I was like, let's watch it again. I watched it again. And the story was totally different. This story was based on the man's love, an arrogant man's love towards the producer, which was a woman, some bossy woman, and how that arrogant person transforms into a loving person. This main aspect of the story was absent in what I watched in Iran. It was only about like a science fiction movie, a day which is being repeated. Eventually the guy gets released for some reasons, but the guy gets released because he learns how to love eventually. That how to love part was completely absent. This is just an example. There are, I mean, so many movies get censored that way. The story changes basically. Like in translation, the guy says, here's my girlfriend, meet my new girlfriend. They say, meet my new cousin. Here's my sister. Meet my sister. You know, they even change those things, like anything, like I said, any sexual or political stuff gets censored widely and strictly.
And what about social media? Could you watch YouTube, Netflix, or could you use Twitter?
Well, there are a few social networks that are not filtered, banned, like Instagram, I believe, and WhatsApp. The rest, they're all filtered. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. I think LinkedIn is open there. Or Netflix, all those channels, they're all filtered. Interestingly, our president, Iranian president, Iranian supreme leader, all the ministers, they all have Twitter accounts, they all have Facebook accounts, and they actually talk to other politicians through those things. For them, it's allowed. For people, it's not allowed. Let me make you one example of discrimination in my country, in Iran. If you want to get employed at a governmental job, there are two interviews. First one is professional, about your profession, how can you do it, blah blah. Second one is something that we call inquisition. They ask you about your ideology, your religious beliefs, how you pray, how many times a day, do you go to Friday prayers, do you submit to the supreme leader. They ask you about Quran, they ask you religious questions basically. If you can't answer those, doesn't matter what kind of expert you are, doesn't matter how professional you are, my friend, rejected. You can't get that job. If that's not discrimination or injustice, I don't know what that is. A person like me could never even think about getting employed at a governmental place, like for example, TV.
Why?
Because of my beliefs, of course. Either I have to lie, pretend that I submit to the supreme leader, which I can't. I can't even answer their questions. I'm not a very religious person. Or, they don't give me the job. They don't even interview me. Isn't that discrimination? The interviewer didn't even ask such thing. You asked. They didn't.
So let's about the book that you translated.
Yeah, there was this another political activist here in Turkey, and he was a refugee also. That's how we got introduced through a friend. And he was a writer, a teacher, and basically an academician. And he had a couple of books, so many books that never got the permit for publishing in Iran. Never, because they were mostly against everything, against the regime, etc. When he moved to Canada through resettlement of UNHCR, of course, US, he asked me to translate this into English, which I did, and he himself also told me, you're taking a risk putting your name on this book and publishing it on Amazon.com. You're taking a risk. I said, I know, I want my name there. This is on my resume, of course, and this is another activity for me, important one. For example, during that interview, they never asked me what the book was about. Why do you think this book, this work of translation would put your life in danger? Why? They never asked me. What was it about? What's the story? They didn't ask. Well, the book is a non-fiction. There are 3 stories, non-fiction, meaning the writer's life story. One of the stories is about the 80s. In Iran, we call it 60s, according to Persian calendar. The 80s, strategically, is a very important decade for Islamic Republic, the Islamic regime. Because, of course, there was a war between Iran and Iraq, an unnecessary war that could be avoided. so many people got killed, so many youngsters. And I think it started 1980 until 1988. Like 80% of the whole decade was war. But the regime glorifies that decade. They publish nostalgia books, nostalgia animated movies, nostalgia cartoons, TV shows. They publish on social network, and people actually not knowing it. People send it to each other. Oh, remember our book used to look like this, etc. They're trying to glorify this dark decade. This decade is one of the darkest era of Iranian history. There was war, there was rations, people didn't have things to eat. And they would send youngsters, very young people, to war. They would draft them by force. Like you're walking on the street and they ask your ID. If you don't have the military service ID done, they would actually catch you and send you to war and send a letter to your family. The writer describes the reality of the 80s, which we call 60s, in that book, to actually oppose the glorification of the regime of this decade, to tell people that this decade, I lived in that decade, I was born in that decade, but that the writer lived that decade. So he writes the truth about that decade, to tell people that, guys, it's not a glorious decade, it's a dark time. The other story is about the writer's trip to a city called Mashhad. That's also politically an important city to the regime, because the 8th Imam of Shi'i Muslims is buried there. The writer describes his relationship with some of those people in that city to show the true nature of those people who support the Islamic regime just to earn money, just to remain rich. That's another one. And there's the other one, the last one, about another trip of the writer to Istanbul by bus with some people who would go to Istanbul to the bazaars to buy cheap clothes and take them back to Iran and sell, with ridiculous prices. Basically, it reveals how badly the regime has destroyed families' economy. Of course the regime wouldn't take such thing. This book is sensitive. They didn't ask me about that. They just said Amazon paper, Amazon page. It's just advertisement. It takes an expert to read the book. Go read the book, then decide at least. Even it is, I believe, sold in Turkey. In so many countries it is sold. I have thought about leaving the country illegally, crossing the borders illegally, like so many others. So many people are actually forced to do so.
You mean leaving Turkey?
Yeah, yeah. But I don't know, something stops me.
What's that?
Well, fear, first of all. It's a very dangerous path. And, I am not alone. I have a wife. I don't want to, at least, put her life in such risk. But honestly, we both thought about it. Because, after some point, almost 7 years, no result, nothing. You get to a point that you might snap. Your mind doesn't take it anymore. You just grab whatever comes. Maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that. But when you start thinking more rationally again, say, okay, let's continue the legal procedure, like, for example, getting an attorney, which is very expensive, like things like that. We decided not to for a couple of times. I don't think I would ever do that.
Do you miss Iran?
I miss my people in Iran. I miss my friends, my family, of course. I miss beautiful places in Iran, of course.
You don't miss the Islamic regime?
That's what stops me missing. Because it's not really worth it. Because it's so dangerous that at some point you would say, okay, stop missing. You try to control your emotions.
Are you still in contact with your friends in Iran?
Sure, but we don't talk about political stuff. My family still lives in Iran. Well, they get harassed sometimes by the Revolutionary Guard agents who are looking for me. Well, not anymore, of course, after 7 years, but when we came here for a year, they were actually threatened, etc., harassed and everything. But you should know that there is no paper, there is no evidence. They don't leave any evidence because what they do is illegal. It's not legal. They don't send any warrant. They don't have any warrant to enter your home. They don't send you anything. There is no paper. Here at the interview, that's what they asked me to give. Like, give me something, some paper, something from the court, blah blah. But there is nothing.
Would you like to live rest of your life here?
Well, if the country wasn't neighbor to Islamic regime of Iran, yeah, why not? This is a nice country, like beautiful nature, kind people, at least to me, and the economy is much better than my own country, of course. But in here, I don't really feel safe. I can't do any political activities here. I'm afraid of those.